tradition that...
These are all quasi-zealot leaders, Essene
But
zealots.
there's a tradition that that James found the remains of the father of John the Baptist and Zechariah, the Pidyon Ben guy from Jesus. Anyway, that Theodosius or somebody, I don't know, that he was buried together with the yesterday.
What's his name? Those are late Armenian church traditions. They're interesting in terms of the burial tradition. I'm not familiar with those later traditions. I have to look them. That's the only interesting contribution that gentleman gave. He did give an interesting contribution to show the traditions regarding the burial, the takeover. I've always wondered why James was associated with the tomb of St. James in the Kedron Valley, the Beni Hezer tomb, which was a priestly tomb. All the pilgrims identified that as the tomb of St. James. I speculated in my book that, in fact, that may be the original of the story of the Jesus in the Holy Sepulchre, and that there was a rich man who had a tomb. And I go in very deeply how there were rich people from Adiabene who were very interested in the James approach. So all that is very unclear, very diffuse, hard to get a handle on. But there's some interesting points, but I wouldn't be able to give you any final conclusion regarding that.
Curiosity, why is he called Bnei Chazir? Is that
Who?
Bnei Chazir?
The Beni Chazir is on the inscription on the wall of that tomb.
But is that somebody?
It's a priestly course. If you look at the returnees on Ezra and
Sons of the Pigs.
I can't help that.
No,
It's
somebody.
I know. No. If you look at the returnees under the different courses, Hezir is one of the courses of the returnees, and probably one of the high priestly families were members of that Hezir family. But I don't think they thought of themselves as pigs, and I think that's just an accidental.
And that tomb has been identified with James.
Pilgrims have always called that the tomb of St. James.
Right next to Absalom's tomb.
Right. And the tomb of Zechariah next door to that. Right. All those. But those were originally high priestly tombs of the Herodian period, ostentatious high priestly families. Now the revolutionaries might have said, I don't want to be vulgar here, the heck with you people, and kicked all their bones out when they took over all this kind of stuff, because they had no respect for these priestly families, particularly rich priestly families. You have a social revolution here, the poor against the rich. Josephus makes that quite clear. They burn all of the debt records, they kill all of the high priests. This is a social revolution, one of the first in history. The Tzaddik is behind it all, like the Ayatollah Khomeini in Persia. He doesn't fight, he doesn't have to kill anyone, but his spirit permeates the whole thing. That's why, to me, James is like the old man on the mountain. But they might easily have kicked all the bodies aside in those tombs and put their heroes in their place. And if James was one of their heroes, he would have maybe been transferred to there. But I'm not sure you had an ossuary. No one ever mentions an ossuary. It seems strange this ossuary should pop willy-nilly out of nowhere. And, where is if this was the ossuary in the ground? Was it piled in a rock tomb someplace? Where did they find this ossuary? Was it buried? Usually you didn't bury ossuaries. They were stacked someplace. Was it stacked someplace? Was it buried in the ground? Why is the back of this ossuary all worn away and the front of it looks fresh as a daisy? It has so many questions regarding this ossuary that I like that it makes James important and interesting. But am I, because of that, to be cynical and say, it's good for me, good for my book, good for James? Or to be honest, we don't need James. We don't need an ossuary to tell us about James. We know James. We've been talking about his importance from the beginning. People maybe have just learned about him. So if the ossuary helps that, it's a good thing. But if the ossuary is being used to deceive people, I don't like any kind of deception of any kind. And I think there is something wrong here. And many others think that too.
Now, the way this has come to the world was through a cover story in Bar. Well, what do you make of that?
Bar is a commercial magazine.
Herschel Shanks has been instrumental in bringing this story to the world.
Herschel Shanks runs a commercial operation centered around archaeology. He's He's a very capable, very quick on the trigger, and knowledgeable in what is going to hit front and center, and he has a lot of power. He's a very good public relations man, and he obviously sees the potential in this, even though earlier he was not interested in James at all, from what I could see, and having talked to him for 15 years before that, he had no idea who James was, and suddenly this appeared, and now he's Mr. James. So, okay, fine. But I think the commercial possibilities, from what I've been hearing from all the people involved in it, are quite staggering. As are the commercial possibilities in the resale of the $250 ossuary. Since I understand it was insured for now $1 million or so, a $250 ossuary should have only been insured for $250. That's all my insurance company would pay me for the car I bought for $250. My car company only pays me for what I actually paid for the car.
Well, obviously this has value more than $1 million.
Well, yeah, but no one knew it at the time. Anyway, these are things that are beyond my scope, but I'll only go that these people are very savvy businessmen who are involved in production of a very glossy, impressive magazine that tries to keep one step ahead of where things are at. But I wouldn't depend on it for my scientific understanding of the universe.
Now, one last question. If Jerusalem wouldn't have...
Was that negative enough?
No, that's fine. But if Jerusalem wouldn't have fallen, would Christianity have evolved into something totally different?
Yes, absolutely. I actually, if Jerusalem had not fallen, I don't think there would be a Christianity. Because the Jerusalem center was taken away with the destruction of Jerusalem, which left the overseas centers free to develop their own ethos. And often these centers were people from Greek and other backgrounds and there's been a long tradition of Greek anti-Semitism long before what we were talking about here. There was hostility between Greeks and Jews in Alexandria, very extreme hostility that ended up in riots, and in the Trajan period ended up in the total annihilation of the whole Jewish community in Alexandria and the Delta, in basically a Holocaust. Tremendous tension between Greeks and Jews in Caesarea and other cities along the coast, and when the uprising occurred, all these cities took it as a signal to kill all the Jewish populations in those towns. And the Jews were not innocent in areas where there are Greeks in their towns, so there was a great hostility. So the fact that there is a latent anti-Semitism in the kind of presentation we have, and anyone who's fair-minded can see it, the Jews are presented as really nasty. The scribes and the Pharisees gnash their teeth. Roman centurions recognize the Messiah. Oh, Chorazin and Bethsaida, if the wonders that have been done here had been done in Lebanon and Syria, they would have belonged long ago. In other words, everyone gets the picture except Jews, Samaritans, the Good Samaritan, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole... Jesus is presented as not loving his countrymen much. Well, if he's not loving his countrymen he loves everyone but his countrymen. If he doesn't love his countrymen very much, how would they ever have been able to accept him as a popular Messiah in the first place? I think he was a popular Messiah in his time, whatever it was he represented, and that gainsays largely, with large crowds of people following him, that picture has come down and reflects the anti-Semitism of the Greco-Hellenized Roman Mediterranean, which is normal. People's attitude. Suppose you were getting a gospel written in Poland in the time of the Second World War. You could have, or in Nazi Germany, you could have gotten some very negative stereotypes of Jews in a gospel of that kind. So it depends on, we say the victors write the history. And unfortunately, they didn't expect the Qumran scroll time capsule. In there, the losers wrote the history. So we are blessed with a precious moment. I hope this sarcophagus enhances it. But no, there wouldn't have been a Christianity because the Palestinian Center would have existed, and the Palestinian Center is more this apocalyptic messianism that you get in the scrolls. It probably wouldn't have been a successful proselytizing activity because it wasn't able to morph and change and receive things like pagan practices such as communion, drinking the body and blood of the living and dying God, or later on Christmas trees or Easter bunnies or reindeer or totem animals or whatever you needed to go. Judaism was too rigid for that, and Islam is more like what a cosmopolitan Judaism would look like, and it's quite rigid.
Okay, there's something I didn't ask you that I should... Sorry, you want to ask something?
Yeah, one question.
I got to go in a minute. I got to meet some. Can I leave my bags here? Or how long are you going to be here today?
All day.
All day.
Okay, I can come back in a couple of hours and get them? Okay.
What would it take? What would it take for you to believe that this ossuary is authentic? Is there?
Yeah, look at me. What
Is there any evidence that you've seen or that could?
I could not believe this ossuary is authentic in its present form. There's only way that I could believe this ossuary. There's no way I can believe this ossuary is authentic in its present form. That it may have been written and that it is James's ossuary, that's possible. That would the only way that could have happened is if it was done in the 4th century. But our paleographers are saying it's not 4th century paleography. They may be wrong there. In other words, if the second part were put by pilgrims who actually found James's body, where it was buried, where they said it was buried, put it in an ossuary, or actually found the ossuary of Jacob, the son of Joseph, and then they wanted to tell their followers, yeah, you know, this is the brother of our Jesus. And by the way, there is a festival in Spain, in Santiago de Compostela, which has an ossuary there where the bones of James are worshipped, which is very similar to the kind of ossuary we have here. And the way that ossuary got to Santiago de Compostela, which became the center of the whole St. James crusading order, the way it got there was that pilgrims brought it there sometime in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries when Palestine was in chaos owing to the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the coming of the Arabs. So at that point gave pilgrims a chance to take relics out. I've always thought, first of all, I don't credit there's a second James. I don't credit that. The second James seems to be part of the multiplication of like-named people in the interest of moving people further away from the Messiah. Okay. So you could have had this ossuary end up in Santiago de Compostela, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised. My brother, by the way, is doing the visitor center there. He's a great architect. He's doing the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin now. He's doing the visiting center at Santiago, so there's sort of poetic justice there. So this could be authentic from a pilgrim, you know, and maybe they left it in Palestine, maybe it was smuggled out to Spain. All those things are possibilities. I have no idea. That's the only way it could be authentic. Other than that, we have modern questions which the Israeli authorities would have to look into, and it's not for me to look into these things. I don't know which is correct. The deeply incised, perfect writing of the first part worries me because it's just too perfect. And that's what I wrote in the LA Times. An ossuary, an inscription that's just too perfect in all its parts, aimed at the modern believing audience, not what an ancient audience would have expected or been expected to write on an ossuary. That's all I can say about it.